Last week, we talked about adding historical details to your stories, to your novels. And so today I'd like to continue talking about details, this time just adding details in general to your stories. How do you do that? And what type of details should you add? So let's talk about that today.
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
Welcome to the Julia Amante channel. If we're just meeting, I am Julia Amante. I'm happy to be here. I'm a women's fiction author. I am a writing teacher. I teach college and I make videos for you. Also write blogs about writing so that I can help other writers that might have some questions about how to write their stories and get some extra tips. So here I am. All right, so let's talk about adding details. Now, a few years ago, well, quite a few years ago now, I decided, probably, gosh, now I would say maybe about 15 years ago, I decided to go back to college and get my MFA. And MFA is a master's in fiction. And the reason I did that, I was already published, so it wasn't to become a published author. I'd already been published multiple times with three publishers. So it wasn't that. It wasn't like I need to get this MFA in order to be able to publish my book. So why would I do that? Why would I do something crazy like go back to college? Well, I wanted to teach. So I wanted to teach writing. And for that, of course, I did need to get my master's. And so I was happy with how my publishing career was going, how my writing career was going, except financially, right? So financially, yeah, I was like I said, worked with 3 different publishers, major New York publishers. So I should have been making a lot of money, but the truth is you don't really make that much money unless you get really lucky and your book just like becomes a bestseller, right? So you make some money, you make enough money to keep going. But I was thinking, well, my kids are getting older. They're going to go to college, right? I need to make sure that I have some money for them. I'm going to go back to college, get my master's in fiction, and I'm going to teach. So that's what I did. But what I found when I went back to college is it kind of messed up my ideas of writing. So I learned to write fiction by reading fiction. I learned to write fiction by reading books about writing fiction from other people who'd already been writing fiction. I learned by going to writers' conferences and listening to writers talk about writing. I learned by doing what you're doing right now, by listening to writers and getting tips from them. That's how I learned, and that was sort of my focus, because I wasn't going to write a literary novel. That really wasn't my goal. I wasn't going to, wasn't a journalist. So I was really just wanting to write fiction, and so I listened to the people that were really writing. But when you go to college, it's different because you find all kinds of people. There were, writers that did want to write literary. There were also writers that were writing a variety of things. Most of the books and most of the people and other writers that I associated with were women's fiction writers, romance writers, some general fiction, some suspense, some of that, but mostly they were writing similar stories than what I was writing. When I got to college, people were writing completely different types of things, right? So some were writing memoirs, some were writing literary fiction, some were writing mysteries, and some general fiction as well. So the way that it worked when I got into these classes that were mostly for the upper division, where we were already into the last year of school and getting ready to we're writing our own dissertation at the time, which was that each person really needed to create their own creative whatever, right? Their book of poetry, whatever it was, their novel. So we would workshop our work. So we would bring chapters in and everybody would read and critique each other's work. And when this was happening, a lot of the critique that I received was that my stories needed specific details, that I did not add enough specific details. And so I thought, well, okay. And I would add more and I would still get the same feedback. Like, okay, yeah, we're not really seeing it here. You need more details. And one of my professors in one of the classes that I took had us read Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried, which um, is this book here. And what we read just a little part of it, right? So he actually photocopied it, and then I went and got the book. But he photocopied it and had us read this little section. And the whole point of us reading this was that what Tim O'Brien does in The Things They Carried is that he focuses on like details and how important they are because they tell us so much about the character and what was happening. So I'm going to read just this little section because this is what he had us read. So the things they carried, and so this is during it's a story about the Vietnam War and the soldiers and all of that. The things they carried were largely determined by necessity. Among the necessities or near necessities were P38 can openers, pocket knives, heat tabs, wristwatches, dog tags, mosquito repellent, chewing gum, candy, cigarettes, salt tablets, packets of Kool-Aids, lighters, matches, sewing kits, military payment certificates, sea rations, and 2 or 3 canteens of water. Together, these items weighed between 12 and 18 pounds, depending on a man's ability to rate a metabolism. Henry Dobbins, who was a big man, carried extra rations. He was especially fond of canned peaches and heavy syrup over pound cake. Dave Jensen, who practiced field hygiene, carried a toothbrush, dental floss, and several hotel-sized bars of soap he'd stolen on R&R in Sydney, Australia. Ted Lavender, who was scared, carried tranquilizers until he was shot in the head outside of the village of Than Key in mid-April. By necessity and because he was SOP, they all carried steel helmets that weighed 5 pounds, including the liner and camouflage cover. They carried the standard fatigue jackets and trousers. Very few carried underwear. Okay. On their feet, they carried Jungle Boots, 2.1 pounds, and Dave Jensen carried 3 pairs of socks and a can of Dr. Scholl's foot powder as a precaution against trench foot. Okay, goes on, right? Goes on. The point that my professor was trying to make was that this was so good because with this list of things that these men carried, it told us, first of all, how could you imagine, right? The weight of all this stuff that they had to hold and how, how rough this was for them. But also he points out individual people, right? And their things that they carried, the special things that they carried that was important to them, that tells you something about their personality. One was more anxious and scared. One was worried about dental hygiene when he could be shot at any minute. It was the uniqueness of each person. It helped us as students, right, to and the reader to imagine, right, what it was like to be these men. And so after reading this, after, going through the workshops with my classmates, and this other class with this other professor who was talking about details, I thought, okay, I get it. Okay, I get it now. These are the type of details that my classmates are looking for, that my professors are looking at. This is what I need to add to my novels to become a better writer, because although I was there because I wanted the degree so I could teach, I also, of course, had this always wanting to improve, wanting to become a better writer. So at the time, the story that I was writing That Was Then. That was the story that I actually wrote multiple times during that time when I was getting my MFA. So again, picture this. I'm already a published author. I've already got a contract to write the next novel, which became That Was Then. I'm writing for my editor, but I'm also writing for my classmates, my professor, and changing the story multiple times. So I'm getting feedback from the college and then writing the story. So I go to a conference with my, I went, my editor's there. So I tell her how I've taken some chapters to my classmates and that they are telling me that I should be very specific. So that was then takes place in a California town that used to be all orange groves. That all the oranges came from this area, Southern California. So I tell her, my classmates are telling me that I really need to like describe these oranges and the scent, and when you open one up, the spray of the orange, so that people could smell it and feel it, and I'm not doing enough of that. My editor just kind of looks at me and she says, "Please don't write 3 pages describing an orange or an orange grove. Nobody wants to read that." So instinctively, I knew that, right? So I've been writing for years. I know really what needs to be in a commercial fiction novel. It is not a literary novel. The commercial fiction authors they are reading for details, not that much detail, not those deep pages and pages of details. They just don't want that. They're reading for the plot and the emotion of the characters and all of that. So again, I instinctively knew that, but now I'm kind of feeling like torn, right? I'm feeling kind of confused because I could see the benefit of adding more details and becoming a better descriptive writer, but I can also understand that if I want to continue to sell books to publishers that are actually really buying the books, then I need to write those type of books, not those very deep, detailed, rich in senses, not that much, right? So what did I learn from this whole thing? I learned that it's extremely important to add the right details and to provide that to the reader, because the reader does need that, right? They do need to feel that. But there's also that I need to be true to a genre. And if I'm writing a romance or I'm writing women's fiction or whatever it is, I need to be true to that genre, because that's what readers that read that expect. So it wasn't that I was a bad writer before and now I was going to be a good writer because now I was adding details and I was doing what these MFA instructors and students were telling me, right? So you cannot judge one genre based on all the other ones. So I can't judge my commercial fiction based on literary fiction. Just two different things. So my takeaway from this was that my classmates were right, but they were also wrong, right? And I need to trust myself, and I also need to listen to some of the things that I learned while I was involved in this, getting my degree. So these are the tips that I have for you as far as adding details. First thing is, you do not want to slow down your story. I'm assuming you're writing commercial fiction. If you're writing literary fiction, again, you could take more time, be more descriptive. The story can be slower. There are stories that not a lot happens. It's more of describing maybe one event that happened in detail with the emotions, what people felt and all of that. But if you're writing commercial fiction, you don't want to slow down your story with details. So if the details are going to slow down your story, then you don't want them. Pausing for a second to let you know about a couple of courses that I've created. If you're a beginning writer and you want some help with your book, I just want to let you know that I do have a basic course on how to write, and I'm going to post it below. And if you're not a beginning writer, but you are more established and you're ready to publish your work, you have your novel written, I also have a publishing course. And I will also post it below, so take a look at it. Maybe there'll be just what you're looking for. All right, let's go back to the video now. Okay, so the first thing is don't describe everything, okay? Don't describe everything. The reason my editor said nobody wants to read 3 pages of what an orange is like is it's true. First of all, everybody knows mostly, right, what an orange would smell like, feel like when you peel it, maybe what it would feel like to walk in orange grove. Not everybody, so you want to describe a little bit of it, and only enough that's what it's important for the story, right? You don't want to go into huge details. You just want to talk a little bit about it. You can say they're walking through the orange groves, the smell of the orange blossoms, maybe the rustling of the leaves, and leave it at that. You don't have to describe every little thing, because it just slows down the story. Number two is focus on what is unique. If you're writing a fantasy novel that has a world that we don't know anything about, that looks different, that there are different rules, then you want to describe that because we don't know what it's like, right? So things can just float through the air and you just pick them up because there's no gravity. Well, we need to know that because we don't know that. We're going to assume that there's gravity. So if there's anything different or unique about what you're writing or what you're describing, then take a little time to really go in deep and explain so that the reader understands what it is that they're reading. So first thing is, don't describe everything. Second thing is, make sure that you're describing what is unique and different in your stories so that people can really focus on why your story is different or what is happening that is different. Third is use all your senses, but not at the same time. Okay, so you don't want to go through this list of what it looked like, what it smelled like, what it felt like, what it sounded like, all of that, right? You don't want to do that all at once. Choose one thing or choose a couple of things and describe it. It doesn't have to be all at the same time, and you don't have to use all your senses. Use all your senses within the story, within your book. So if you tend to always focus on visual, for example, that's me, then you don't want to do that, right? So you want to have some variety within your novel. So sometimes you're going to focus on what something looks like, maybe a different time, something else, some other type of description. You're focusing on what something smells like or what it sounds like, right? So don't do all your senses all at once. Just choose the most important one. Choose something that's obvious that the character would notice. Maybe they go into a place and it's freezing, right? So that's the first thing they're going to notice and they're going to say. Or maybe, whatever, something happens that is unusual, right? So different, and they notice that. They notice how it smells, they notice what it looks like, they notice something like that. So use your senses, use a variety of them, just don't do it all at once. Okay, number 4 is to be specific because this saves you time. So what did Tim O'Brien do in his book when he's giving you a list of items? It saves time, right? So by giving you a list of things that these guys carried, it tells you something about them. It's sort of a shortcut into describing things. So being specific about things is important for you and for the reader. Okay, so let's say that I'm writing a scene where the mom is making a cake, and I, am very specific about like the ingredients that she puts into this chocolate cake and how she stirs it and how she bakes it and how it comes out, how she decorates it, and I go into every little detail and I explain everything. And then when she's done, she takes the beautiful cake that she's finished and she throws it into the trash. And then she thinks something like, her daughter's been in a coma now for 6 months, 9 months, and the doctors have just told her she's not going to come out of the coma, and she knows that it's over, right? And by baking this cake, like, it could mean a lot of different things, right? Just depending on what happened before. It could mean, here's this beautiful girl and there's this beautiful cake, and then it's done. It's wasted. All this time she has spent doing, raising this child, taking care of this child, taking care of, all of that. It's now gone in an instant, right? So it could be sort of a metaphor in a way, right? Or it could be maybe a different thing. Maybe it's the relationship that she's had with her daughter, that she's taken all this time and yet still there's no connection. There's nothing that, that happens. So it just depends. But by being very, very specific and then, having some kind of meaning to it, adding the meaning to it, makes it even more important, right? Because it tells us something. It's a shortcut to what their relationship is like. It's a shortcut to what her feelings are like about losing her child, whatever it may be. So be specific in certain areas. This is different than describing an orange for just a random reason of describing an orange so that the reader can get the feel of the orange, right? This is different because you're being very specific in order to say something. When Tim O'Brien is telling us the things they carried, it's not just because he wants to give us a list. It's because he wants us to understand the weight on these guys. He wants us to understand how rough it was. He wants us to understand how each individual person, even though they carried a lot of the same things, each had their own little things that made them who they are and their personality, right? So hopefully that makes sense. So be specific about things, but be choosy about the details that you choose to describe. And the fourth thing I'm going to suggest is to avoid non-descriptive language. So all those words, and this I say to my college students all the time, the words like very or really or anything like that that doesn't describe anything. That she had very pretty eyes. It was a very pretty dress. It was it was even beautiful. It was a beautiful dress. It doesn't tell us enough. It's not specific, right? So it doesn't give us an image. So any non-descriptive word, change it to something else. If you say something's beautiful, what's beautiful to you is different than what's beautiful to me, right? So we need to be on the same page. So I need to describe it and let the reader understand that it's beautiful, right? By the way that I'm describing it, by the specific way that I'm explaining something. That's better than just saying something was very pretty, it was, wonderful. Those are non-descriptive words. So try to avoid those non-descriptive words when you're describing. And actually that was number 5, not number 4. Okay, so let's go over it again real quick. Number 1 is don't describe everything, right? Only the things that are very important. Describe the things. Number 2, describe things that are unique to your story, something that's different that people would need you to describe. If I'm describing an old car from, I don't know, the 1930s, then I want to describe it because we're not used to seeing that, even though it's unique because it's something that we don't see today in today's world very often. Number 3, use all of your senses, but not at the same time. Number 4, be specific because it saves you time and it saves space. And number 5 is to avoid the non-descriptive words. Choose those specific ones and avoid the non-descriptive words. So what this will do is it will create a richer story. The descriptions will add to will add to your story. Will make it a better, stronger story. But because you're being very choosy about what you choose to describe and you're being specific about the things you do describe, it's going to be a better book. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more of a feel of descriptions. So again, last week we talked about historical details, this time about just details in general and what to choose and what not to choose. So hopefully between last week and this week, you have a better understanding of details. I hope this has helped you. And if it has, hit that like button, please, and then come back next week for more tips, and we'll talk about a different topic next week. See you then.